Capítulo 195, Kirona and Nashir. Today, Uchiha Byakuya received a special phone call. It was a matter related to the predecessor of the TSC and the CCG, as well as a company called Sphinx Corporation. In the past, it had been a long-term supplier of the RC-infused liquids for the CCG. RC-infused liquid was one of the key materials used in the production of quinks and RC suppressants. But in reality, the CCG, or rather, the Washu family had the full capability to produce RC-infused liquids on their own, with absolutely no need to purchase it externally at all. Doing so was simply one of the CCG's old smokescreens, making it easier to secretly carry out the more covert operations. For example, the president of Sphinx Corporation, also known as the company's boss, he was named Yasuhisa Ammon. The underground facility of his home served as a secret experimental base for the CCG. There, a wide variety of ghoul-related experiments were carried out, with the most representative being the creation of artificial half-ghouls. Of course, in the original story, the Washu family abandoned this experiment because there hadn't been any significant progress for a long time, until later when Akihiro Kanu finally and successfully transformed Kenki Ken into an artificial half-ghoul. And when the Washu family abandoned the experiment, naturally, Yasuhisa Ammon, who knew far too much about the secret, had to be silenced. Only his two children were left behind, the two twin girls, Yasuhisa Kirona and Yasuhisa Nashiro. Later, Akihiro Kanu forcibly took over the underground facility beneath Yasuhisa Ammon's home. That place had already been abandoned by the Washu family, and with Yasuhisa Ammon himself gone, no one was left to stop Akihiro Kanu. Kanu not only used it as his own laboratory, but also deceived both Kirona and Nashiro into undergoing his artificial half-ghoul experiments. Although both experiments succeeded, like with Kenki Ken, the outcome was still tragic as Nashiro was eventually gravely wounded and left dying at the hands of the now-ghoul investigator, Juzu Suzuya. In order to keep Nashiro alive, Kirona absorbed her into her own body and continued searching for a way to save her. The first time Kirona had begged Kanu to save Nashiro, he had completely ignored the two sisters. Perhaps at that point, Kanu already knew Nashiro was far beyond saving. Years later, Kirona had grown into an SS-rated ghoul and even a half-kakuja. When she then confronted Kanu again, he flat-out told her that Nashiro had long been no different from dead. After the Dragon War ended, Kirona continued carrying Nashiro, who may have already been dead, inside of her, and left Japan to roam Europe, the Middle East, and other regions. Looking back at the lives of these twin sisters, Kirona and Nashiro, one could only say they were incredibly tragic. However, the timeline Byakuya was now didn't match the one in which Yasuhisa Ammon was silenced by the Washu family. That event should still be a few years away from now. Now that the Washu family had already been changed by Byakuya, and the CCG had become the TSC, he hadn't paid any attention to Yasuhisa Ammon. After all, only the original Washu family would care about the risk of ghoul experiment secrets being exposed. But the message Uchiha Byakuya received now was quite different from expectation. Yasuhisa Ammon had still died. What exactly happened? Byakuya was asking for details over the phone. It seems that Yasuhisa Ammon was heavily in debt to begin with, which is why he took the risk of cooperating with the CCG. By providing a location for the CCG to conduct those experiments, he was able to receive massive financial assistance. But now that both the CCG and the Washu family have already. He stopped shortly before continuing. That cooperation naturally ended, and without it, he couldn't fill the financial gaps. Over the past year, with interest compounding on interest, no one even knows how much debt he ended up with. Then, just last night, he jumped from the roof of his Sphinx Corporation building. After learning the whole story, Byakuya could only feel a bit speechless. It seemed this Yasuhisa Ammon was simply destined for this kind of miserable end. No matter what path he took, it always led to death. Either he would be silenced by the Washu family like in the original story, or he'd jump to his death himself. The moment this guy, with a guilty conscience, risked everything to cooperate with the CCG in those inhumane experiments. He had already sealed his fate. Keeping this guy alive wasn't impossible, but that would require Byakuya to make the Washu family support him for free, and since when does the world hand out blessings for nothing? Though there was some sense of pity, with everything this man had done, his death wasn't undeserved. The ones to feel sorry for were Yasuhisa Kurona and Yasuhisa Nashiro, those two children who had now lost all their family even earlier than in the original storyline. Yasuhisa Amon also left behind two children. Do those two need to be handled somehow? I'll take care of it, Byakuya replied. He planned to let Yasuhisa Kurona and Yasuhisa Nashiro live in an orphanage like Juzu Suzuya once had. After hanging up the phone, Byakuya prepared to head out. Naturally, the nearby Yoshimura Ito had also heard the phone conversation just now, and she immediately said, "I'll go with you." "Sure," Byakuya responded. Then, the two of them headed together toward Yasuhisa Amon's home. On the way there, those two kids of that Yasuhisa Amon, they're not normal, right? At that moment, Ito suddenly asked. Ever since she had learned certain secrets, she'd realized that Byakuya wasn't the kind to meddle in just anything that he came across. The people Byakuya chose to interact with or help were always a bit abnormal or important in the end. That's why she made that guess. That's right. Yasuhisa Kurona and Yasuhisa Nashiro are twin sisters. Their father was heavily involved in the research of artificial half-ghouls. Byakuya answered honestly. Ito's guess was immediately confirmed. I knew it. I was wondering why a guy like you would go so out of your way to stick your nose into other people's business. So this is the reason, huh? Yeah, I also resonated with their tragic experience a little, so I wanted to do something for them. Byakuya said, thinking back to his own parents. What experience? Ito immediately asked with some curiosity. Uchiha Byakuya then gave her a brief rundown of Kurona and Nashiro's lives so far, including the debt and deeds of their father. There really are a lot of tragedies in this world, Ito remarked with a soft sigh. But at the same time, there are a lot of beautiful things too, aren't there? It's just that fate plays cruel tricks, and some people's lives are nearly filled entirely with tragedy. Byakuya said, looking at her. At that moment, Byakuya and Ito had finally arrived at Yasuhisa Amon's original home. Capitulo 196, Actual Care. It was a luxurious villa. Only, the owner of this villa was no longer here. The door wasn't even locked as Uchiha Byakuya and Yoshimura Ito simply pushed it open and walked in. Is anyone here? Byakuya called out as he stepped inside. But no one responded for a long time. Byakuya wasn't sure whether Yasuhisa Kurona and Yasuhisa Nashiro were even home, so he had no choice but to go upstairs and take a look. Not long after, Byakuya entered a bedroom and saw the twin sisters lying on the bed, shivering slightly and huddled closely together. The tear stains on their faces said everything. They had clearly already learned about their father's suicide. It was more than obvious that their father's death had struck them hard. Even when they realized that two strangers had just entered the house, they barely reacted. At this point in time, both Yasuhisa Kurona and Yasuhisa Nashiro were still very young and only about the same age as Mayu and the other kids. Their outfits matched their names perfectly, as did their hair. Kurona had jet black hair and wore a black dress, while Nashiro had snow-white hair and wore a fitting white dress. As twins, their facial features were naturally identical. Both were delicate and refined. You two must be Yasuhisa Amon's daughters, Yasuhisa Kurona and Yasuhisa Nashiro, right? Byakuya followed standard procedure and presented his work credentials. We're staff from the TSC. After learning what happened to your father, we've come to pick you up. But the twin sisters still didn't respond, staying silent. After a while, Kurona finally spoke first. Where are you taking me and Nashiro? As she spoke, her gaze slowly turned to these two strangers. Her first impression was that, at least, they didn't look like bad people. Though one shouldn't judge by appearances, Kurona was still a child. Simply because Byakuya and Ito were both very good-looking, she felt like they probably weren't bad people. Where would you like to go? Byakuya didn't directly say that he was going to take them to an orphanage, and instead asked this. I don't know. Her voice wavered a bit as she quietly spoke. We don't have any family anymore. I don't know where we should go. Kurona's tone sounded completely lost. Nashiro herself still hadn't spoken a word. Compared to her sister Kurona, the younger sibling was clearly more fragile and had a much weaker ability to cope emotionally with all of this. Then, why don't you come with this Nick-san here and me for now? At that moment, Ito spoke up with a gentle smile. Just like Byakuya, she didn't plan to mention the ghoul orphanage right away. Besides, nothing had actually been set in stone yet. For a pair of twin sisters who had only just lost their father, when they hadn't even fully processed the fact that he had taken his own life, telling them that they were being sent to an orphanage now, anyone with a heart would know that this wouldn't make them feel any better. Hearing Ito's words, Kurona hesitated. Nashiro still gave no response. But just then, Kurona's little stomach let out a low growl, and at almost the exact same time, Nashiro's did too. The twins' faces flushed slightly pink from embarrassment. They felt a little ashamed. Are you hungry? You didn't eat today. Byakuya asked immediately. We haven't eaten anything since last night. Kurona slowly replied. It was just last night that she and Nashiro had even learned of their father's suicide. And since then, they obviously hadn't been in any mood to eat. No wonder. Uchiha Byakuya gave a slightly awkward smile. Well then, let's at least eat something first. Thank you, Kurona said softly. She thought they were going out to eat, so she was about to urge Nashiro to get up and come with her. But at that moment, Ito spoke first. How about, we cook something for you instead, if there are still ingredients in the fridge? Upon hearing this, Byakuya thought that it sounded like a good idea. Nashiro reacted as well, looking at this beautiful older sister with some surprise. There should still be food left, but this kind of thing. Kurona started to speak, but trailed off halfway. Then we'll go prepare the meal now. You two can come down in a few minutes. Ito said. Okay. Kurona responded, slightly dazed. After Byakuya and Ito left the bedroom, Kurona and Nashiro looked at each other. The two sisters could both see the same surprise and confusion in each other's eyes. As if they were both wondering why these people were even being so kind to them. Nashiro, let's hurry up and get ready, then go downstairs. It's rare for someone to be so kind to us. Kurona was the first to speak. I'm really hungry too. Nashiro nodded slightly. By the time Byakuya and Ito had nearly finished preparing the food, Kurona and Nashiro had just come downstairs. The two then sat obediently at the dining table, waiting. Looking at the two figures in the kitchen, they felt a bit lost. Because their mother had already passed away when they were very young, and their father Yasuhisa Ammon had hardly ever even taken actual care of them. All along, it had just been hired servants who cooked, cleaned, and did the housework for both Kurona and Nashiro. They'd rarely even had the chance to spend time with their father, but at least back then, they still had a family. When the news of Yasuhisa Ammon's suicide got out, it was also revealed that he had accrued massive debts. The former servants simply packed up and ran off without hesitation. So today, there was no one left in the house, except for Kurona and Nashiro. What stunned and confused both of them was the fact that they were now receiving this kind of care from two complete strangers. It was different from those former servants, after all, those people only stayed for profit, and once there was nothing more to gain, they left. Of course, that wasn't to say those servants were inherently bad people. Their behavior was perfectly understandable. But by comparison, what these two strangers, this Nick-san and Nisan, were doing had left a far deeper impression on them. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, Byakuya, taste this for me. I think it should be okay, right? Ito scooped up a small spoonful of miso soup, gently blew on it, and then offered it to Byakuya to try. Yeah, it's very good. I'm sure they'll like it. Byakuya praised her. Don't praise me too early. If they don't like it later, I'm blaming you. Ito said with a laugh. Then, both Byakuya and Ito began bringing the dishes and soup out one by one. They were perfect portions for 4 people. Capitulo 197, New Home. Looking at the dinner that Uchiha Byakuya and Yoshimura Ito had just brought out, Yasuhisa Kurona and Yasuhisa Nashiro both looked a little dazed. Although the dishes weren't as fancy as the ones usually made by the servants, they instead gave the sisters a very sincere and simple feeling. To begin with, the dishes those servants made in the past were only actually fancy in appearance. The taste was honestly mediocre. Let's eat first. Only when your stomach is full can you properly think about what to do next. Byakuya said to the two sisters. Okay. Kurona and Nashiro spoke almost at the same time and nodded obediently in unison as well. The two then picked up their rice bowls together and reached with their chopsticks for the same dish. As expected of twins, even their movements were this incredibly synchronized. After tasting the food, both Kurona's and Nashiro's eyes instantly widened. Their eyes were already quite large from the get-go, and now widened even more. They looked especially clear and beautiful. It wasn't that they had never eaten food this delicious before, but at least in their memories, it was extremely rare to taste something so good. This was also because Yasuhisa Ammon usually didn't pay much attention to Kurona and Nashiro, so aside from hiring some servants to take care of their daily lives, he didn't do much else for them. And those servants weren't exactly skilled cooks either. Their focus was more on the visual appeal of the dishes. Every meal looked nice but lacked substance. Just like the fine banquets of ancient emperors, they were pleasing to the eye but not necessarily to the tongue. Of course, the nature of those two things was still different. How is it tastes good? At that moment, Ito asked. It's delicious. Kurona answered immediately. Nashiro nodded as well. However, even though they were very hungry and the food was incredibly tasty, the sisters still maintained ladylike elegance. There was no ravenous devouring. Instead, they took small, careful bites. Once they were almost full, they even took the initiative to carry the dishes over to the sink and cleaned all the pots, pans, and utensils. Originally, Byakuya had planned to do those chores himself, but the sisters had insisted on doing it themselves, so he could only hand it over to them. While Kurona and Nashiro were washing the dishes, Byakuya and Ito remained seated at the dining table. Ito said to him, "Are we going to send them straight to the orphanage now, or should we give them a bit more time to accept their father's death?" Byakuya thought for a moment and said, "Let's give them some more time." "I think that's better too." Ito nodded slightly. Then, when Kurona and Nashiro finished washing the dishes and came out, Byakuya said to them, "There's something we need to tell you, though perhaps you already know. It's about this house. Since it belonged to your father and he left behind a massive amount of debt, this house will be repossessed in a few days. You two need to seriously think about where you'll go from here." Kurona was silent for a while, her face full of confusion. "I don't know what to do." "Me neither." Nashiro's eyes were equally vacant. Having lost their family, lost their home, and being now penniless with nothing left, the two sisters could no longer see any hope for their future. After a while, Kurona looked somewhat cautiously at Byakuya and Ito. "Can Nashiro and I go with you? You mentioned earlier about taking us away. Where are you taking us?" Nashiro also quickly spoke up. "As long as I can survive, I'm willing to do anything." In her understanding, the worst thing she could imagine was being taken somewhere to do illegal labor, and the like. Of course, she could imagine even worse things, like being sold to human traffickers or something. But she felt that this Nick-san and Nissan in front of her really didn't seem like bad people, and they had confirmed themselves as members of the TSC, so they should definitely be good people. In fact, Kurona and Nashiro had no idea about their father Yasuhisa Ammon's secret cooperation with the CCG. They only knew that their father's company had business dealings with the former CCG. So in their eyes, the CCG had always had a positive image, and even more so the TSC. "Of course, we're here to take you with us." Byakuya nodded. However, he still hadn't fully decided on how to arrange things for Kurona and Nashiro next. At least for now, he would simply keep Kurona and Nashiro by his side, and once they had more or less recovered, then arrange for them to go to the orphanage. You'll stay at our house for now. At that moment, Byakuya stated directly. Oh, okay. Kurona and Nashiro were both surprised. They had thought about where they might be taken, but never had they imagined they'd be allowed to live directly in someone's home like this. And for them, this was the best outcome, because these two, this Nisan and Nisan in front of them, were people they could trust. In such a moment of despair and sorrow, even if it was two strangers suddenly appearing, treating them so kindly was enough to make them feel the warmth they lacked. Go ahead and pack whatever you can take, like your clothes and such, Byakuya said to Kurona and Nashiro. Kurona and Nashiro both nodded and quickly ran upstairs to do so. They packed up the things they needed, and then followed Byakuya and Ito as they left the villa. Naturally, Byakuya brought Kurona and Nashiro to his own home. Arriving at their new home, Kurona and Nashiro were a bit surprised. It was yet another large villa. After all, Byakuya was no longer someone ordinary in terms of wealth and influence. There are plenty of empty rooms upstairs. You can pick whichever one or two you like. Byakuya said, Mama, Papa, did you bring someone home? At that moment, Mayu, having heard the noise downstairs, ran down immediately. Ever since Byakuya and Ito bought the new house, Mayu had been living with them again. Though actually, it didn't really matter anymore where Mayu lived. At first, she was brought to the 20th Ward's safe zone, because at the time, Byakuya and Ito's true identities couldn't be revealed to her. But now that their greatest enemy, the Washu family, had been taken care of, there was no need to worry about that kind of thing anymore. Capítulo 198, Café and Introductions. Nowadays, Mayu usually spent her time playing at the cafe and came back home to sleep at night. Sometimes she also stayed with the manager. Whatever Mayu felt like doing was fine. When she got downstairs, Mayu immediately saw the two little girls who looked almost exactly alike, with only their hair color being different. Having no concept of what twins even were, Mayu exclaimed in surprise, "They actually look the same? Why is that?" At the same time, Yasuhisa Kurona and Yasuhisa Nashiro had also naturally noticed Mayu come down. What they had also noticed was that Mayu had just called Uchiha Byakuya and Yoshimura Ito Papa and Mama. So obviously they really thought this little girl was the daughter of Byakuya and Ito. That surprised them a bit, because in their eyes, that Nisan and Nisan still looked so young. It felt like they were only a few years older than them, and yet they already had a daughter who looked about the same age as them. However, even their own father didn't look like. He was from the same generation as Byakuya and Ito. Because of this, Kurona and Nashiro felt a bit reserved when facing Mayu. "Sorry for disturbing you," Kurona said very politely. Nashiro was the one who then answered Mayu's earlier question. "Because Nashiro and I are twins, that's why we look alike." "Twins, what's that?" Mayu hadn't even heard this word before. She hadn't gone to school yet, and being mostly self-taught, she hadn't come across this knowledge. This question stumped both Kurona and Nashiro. They only knew that since they were twins, they looked almost exactly the same as their counterpart, but they didn't understand it in any more detail. The two sisters exchanged glances, but neither could find the answer in the other's eyes. "You can just look it up online." Byakuya handed Mayu his phone, which already had the relevant information pulled up. "Here, this is what it means." Mayu nodded, took the phone, and sat on the nearby sofa to study it slowly. "You two can go upstairs and check out the rooms first. I'll carry your luggage up for you," Byakuya said to Kurona and Nashiro. Afterward, both Kurona and Nashiro eventually chose the same room. They had always lived together, practically inseparable, and even slept in the same bed. So now that they were at Byakuya's place, they still shared the same bedroom. Byakuya already knew that the two sisters were always together, so he didn't ask much. Once the room was more or less set up, Kurona and Nashiro came downstairs again. They planned to get to know Mayu, because in their eyes, Mayu was clearly an important part of this home, while the two of them were just outsiders. But just as they came downstairs, Suzuya Juzu had also arrived to play with Mayu. And now they saw another unfamiliar boy. Kurona softly asked, Is that your older brother or younger brother? Nope, he's my best friend. His name is Juzu Suzuya. Mayu then asked, by the way, your names are Yasuhisa Kurona and Yasuhisa Nashiro, right? She had already heard about Kurona and Nashiro from her papa and mama earlier, so she knew their names. Yes, I'm Kurona. The latter nodded. I'm Nashiro. Nashiro also nodded. Then from now on, I'll call you Kurona and Nashiro. We're friends now. Mayu said with a cheerful smile. Friends. Kurona and Nashiro both paused slightly. Although they had gone to school, they had never had anything like akin to a friend. At school, they were always quiet and withdrawn, barely if ever interacting with any of their classmates. In Kurona's eyes, there was only Nashiro, and in Nashiro's only Kurona. Even though it felt a little strange, since Mayu was clearly an important member of this household, they could only go along with it. Just like that, Kurona and Nashiro temporarily moved in with Byakuya. However, Byakuya and Ito obviously weren't home all the time. With the TSC, Shui publishing, and other matters aside, they also spent most of their daytime hours at Kamui University. They weren't quite comfortable leaving Kurona and Nashiro at home alone. After all, Mayu wasn't home most of the time either. So they decided Kurona and Nashiro would spend their days at the Anteiku Cafe and return home to sleep at night like Mayu usually would. Also, being around the kind and gentle people of Anteiku would help the girls recover from their grief more quickly. Before bringing them to Anteiku, Byakuya had also explained the sisters' situation to the manager and others. Wow, Byakuya-kun, you really brought Kurona and Nashiro here. Since Byakuya had already told them about Kurona and Nashiro, Kirishima Hikari of course already knew of them. Now seeing them in person, Hikari looked absolutely delighted. Such adorable twin sisters. Arata, wouldn't it be great if we could have a pair of twins too? Arata just gave a slightly troubled, embarrassed smile. That would be kind of difficult. After all, whether one would have twins or not was pretty much pure luck. The cafe was full of strangers, and the shy, timid Kurona and Nashiro appeared a bit nervous. Kurona was doing slightly better, while Nashiro subtly positioned herself behind her sister. But the pretty Nissan in front of them, Hikari, at least gave them a sense of warmth, helping them to relax a little. Welcome, this is the Cafe Anteiku. We're all friends of Byakuya and Ito, so there's no need for you to be nervous or scared. At that moment, Yoshimura Kyuzan walked out carrying 2 cups of coffee and spoke to Kurona and Nashiro. Since this is your first time here, why don't you try some of our coffee? Okay, thank you. Kurona sat down at one of the seats and accepted one of the cups of coffee. Nashiro also sat next to her sister and joined in tasting the coffee Yoshimura Kyuzan had brewed himself. Though it was their first time drinking coffee, Yoshimura Kyuzan had heavily adjusted the flavor to be suitable for children, and they found it quite tasty. Their moods immediately relaxed a bit. It seemed like everyone here was truly kind, just like Byakuya-san and Ito-san. By now, they obviously had learned the names of the people they loved with. Of course, Byakuya and Ito hadn't told them that most of the people in this cafe were actually ghouls, so as not to frighten Kurona and Nashiro. Capitulo 199, Off Campus. After spending some time together, Yasuhisa Kurona and Yasuhisa Nashiro had already become relatively familiar with everyone in Anteiku. Up until now, they still didn't know that the manager, Kirishima-san, and the others who treated them so warmly on a daily basis were actually ghouls. Although Anteiku had gained quite a bit of fame after the Tokyo defense battle, both Kurona and Nashiro didn't really pay attention to the news, so they didn't know much about Anteiku's background. Still, there would always come a day when Kurona and Nashiro had to learn about these things. So today, Kirishima Hikari took the initiative to bring it up with them. Uchiha Byakuya didn't think there was anything wrong with that either. In the beginning, he hadn't wanted Kurona and Nashiro to experience too much potential fear while they were still emotionally unstable. Now, after so many days had passed, it should be fine. Kurona and Nashiro, you both know about ghouls, right? Yes. Kurona and Nashiro nodded at the same time. Of course they knew about ghouls. Since ghouls had long been regarded as humanity's enemies, it was mandatory knowledge in school. However, they also knew that nowadays humans and ghouls seem to be able to coexist peacefully. Actually, most of the people here are ghouls, including your Ito-nisan. Only a few of us could really be called human. Hikari spoke frankly to Kurona and Nashiro. You're all ghouls. Kurona and Nashiro were both very surprised. Because these ghouls were far more gentle and kind than they had imagined. So even though they had suddenly learned that the others were ghouls, they didn't show any signs of fear. And they had never been harmed by a ghoul before, so they didn't have much prejudice against them either. But of course we don't have any intention of harming you, we just didn't want to keep it from you forever. Hikari nodded with a smile. I still think you're all good people. Kurona said immediately. I feel the same as Kurona. Nashiro said as well. That's good, I was worried you'd be upset or wouldn't be able to accept it. Hikari said. At that moment, the cafe's door was pushed open. Entering were Byakuya and Ito, along with both Washu Nomura and Kamishiro Rise. Of course, this time Nomura and Rise weren't here for anything urgent. They just stopped by Anteku from time to time for a visit, and today was one of those times. After their trip to Germany, Nomura and Rise had completely reconciled, and now they were practically inseparable. Rise had also gradually come to accept the Washu family as well, because the current Washu family truly had changed. Even her conflict with Washu, Tsuneyoshi, had begun to ease a little. Now, they were just stuck together every day. In truth, even before leaving the Sunlit Garden, Nomura and Rise were already like this. Speaking of the Sunlit Garden, it was still in operation as of today, though the rules had been entirely rewritten by Byakuya. The foundation of the Sunlit Garden was the Washu family's branch families, like the Arima family, the Ihei family, the Suzo family, and others. As long as those families existed, the Sunlit Garden wouldn't disappear. Originally, the Sunlit Garden existed solely to serve the Washu family. Branch family members who were designated for childbirth were required to give birth to hybrids without any choice. Those designated for combat roles would be assigned to the CCG or the V organization. All in all, there was no freedom whatsoever. But the current Sunlit Garden was completely different. Those branch families no longer needed to obey the Washu family. They could live however they wanted and marry whomever they wished. It was just that since all the branch family members were half-human, whether they married humans or ghouls, their offspring would still only be hybrids. As for whether those newborn half-humans wanted to become combat personnel for the TSC, that would also depend entirely on their own will. Right now, the TSC wasn't lacking in combat power, especially with Byakuya, Ito, and Arimakishu's group able to live forever. The TSC would remain in its golden age indefinitely. As they entered, this was the first time Nomura and Rise met the two of Kurona and Nashiro. Of course, in the original work, the two sides never really crossed paths. If you had to say they had any connection, it would be that when Kurona and Nashiro underwent the artificial half-ghoul experiment, the kakuhu implanted in them came from Rise. Are those guests? Seems like there are two girls I don't recognize, and they look exactly the same. At this moment, Nomura had already noticed Kurona and Nashiro and exclaimed in surprise. They're probably twins. Rise replied casually. They're Kurona and Nashiro. They're considered the newest members of Anteku, I suppose. Byakuya introduced the two to Nomura and Rise. Nice to meet you. Kurona reacted quickly. She realized the boy and girl in front of her were probably acquaintances of Byakuya Niasen and immediately spoke up. Pleased to meet you. Nomura also responded at once. Nomura-kun and Rise-chan, you're here again today. Hikari said warmly. After these few months, everyone had already become very familiar with both Nomura and Rise. Manager Yoshimura, Kirishima Nisan, everyone sorry to trouble you again today. Nomura said. Nomura's so polite. Hikari said with a smile. Then, since Nomura had never seen the twins before, he couldn't help but stare at Kurona and Nashiro a bit longer. Kurona and Nashiro also noticed Nomura's gaze at this moment. Kurona couldn't help but ask, "Is there something on my face?" "No, Kurona's face is very clean. Maybe it's something on mine." Nashiro said, No, it's because I've never seen such beautiful twin sisters before." Nomura gave a slightly awkward smile and explained. The moment he said that, he immediately felt a cold, stabbing glare from beside him. That was, of course, the look from Rise. Nomura, quick on the uptake, instantly covered his mouth and didn't dare say another word. The atmosphere in the cafe instantly filled with a cheerful atmosphere. Byakuya and Ito's campus life also continued as usual. Basically, whenever they had free time, they would visit the GHOUL Research Society. "We've planned a club activity. We're thinking about going off campus to research ghouls." At this moment, the club president Momo said to Byakuya, "Going off campus to research ghouls?" Byakuya was a bit surprised. Capitulo 200, Tsukiyamashu. This guy Momo was also a bit hard to figure out. Coming here to study abroad with the identity of an associate special class investigator from China was already surprising enough. But he was actually researching ghouls in the GHOUL Research Society, a school club of all places. It's no wonder about their standards. It was likely only Vice President Suzuki who knew of Momo's true identity. None of the other club members had a clue. As long as it's somewhere off campus, then I've got a good place in mind. Or rather, not just one. Uchiha Byakuya said. For example, Kakuya. Of course, it wasn't like he'd actually bring Momo and the others to a place like Kakuya. Momo, after all, was still a genuine associate special class investigator, even if from another country. But the rest of the members were still students, and clearly not suitable to be taken to a place like Kakuya. He had another place in mind. "Where is it?" Momo asked immediately. The rest of the members were also extremely curious. After all, the person in question was the supreme chairman of the TSC. The place he could take them to surely wasn't anything that could be considered as ordinary. Tokyo, the Tsukiyama estate. The place Byakuya brought Momo and the others to was none other than the Tsukiyama family mansion. Or rather, a luxurious grand manor. Due to the prior matter in Germany, Yoshimura Tsunayoshi had personally gone over to clean up the mess, and the Tsukiyama family was, because of it, very grateful to Byakuya. They had previously invited him to visit, though he hadn't gone until now. As for the Rosewold family, although they weren't completely annihilated down to just one member, they had already been torn apart. That ghoul family, unfortunately, was now as good as gone, though many of its members had survived. They simply had to go into hiding under new names. That was already the best outcome that the Washu had fought for. If Washu Tsunayoshi hadn't gone, then in the original timeline, every member of the Rosewold family, except Canny, would have been wiped out. Now, Karen von Roswald, the former being her actual name, had returned from Germany to the Tsukiyama family to prepare for the Rosewold family's revival, and had changed her name to Canny von Roswald. When they arrived at the gates of the Tsukiyama estate, apart from Byakuya and Yoshimura Ito, the reactions of everyone else were filled with excitement. Momo and Suzuki Ayaka were relatively composed in comparison, but the other club members were all wide-eyed in awe. After all, such a grand house was extremely rare to see. Just then, one of the Tsukiyama family servants came to open the door for them. "Uchiha-sama, Yoshimura-sama, and everyone else, please come in." The Tsukiyama family's servants were all ghouls, and their combat strength was nothing to scoff at either. After Byakuya and the group entered, one servant spoke again. "The master has important matters today and is still out. He didn't know you two would come by unexpectedly, and we ask your pardon. If needed, we'll inform the master at once. He should return soon." "It's all right. We just brought our classmates to take a look around. No need to trouble President Tsukiyama." Byakuya calmly said. "I see, then please make yourselves at home. We can serve as your guides." The servant said. Actually, they just wanted to study the lifestyle of upper-class ghouls, so just looking around is more than enough. Byakuya explained. He had already explained the situation about the Tsukiyama family to the other club members in advance, As much as possible, just observe. Don't get any ideas about researching people's kakyuhu or kagyun. All right. After that, the servants followed behind Byakuya and the others, and if anything was needed, they just had to call. Byakuya and the rest simply wandered around. The Tsukiyama family's grand estate was massive. Just a casual walk around already took quite a bit of time. Soon, they also met the young master of the Tsukiyama family, Tsukiyama Shu. Currently, because of his young age, Tsukiyama Shu was only around 12 years old. He still looked a bit obedient and introverted, nothing like the flamboyant, unrestrained person he would become in the original story. Attending to Tsukiyama Shu at the moment was none other than Kanny of the Rosewold family. Right now, however, Kanny was dressed as a boy. She had light purple hair as her long hair had already been cut short. Her face was handsome, and her disguise was well done. It really wasn't easy to tell that she was actually a girl. Because of her special identity, not only did she go into hiding under a new name, but she also had to conceal her real gender. Dressing as a boy was her way of reviving the Rosewold family. However, for now, what she should be doing was properly serving Master Tsukiyama Shu. Master Shu, it looks like a few unfamiliar people have arrived. At this moment, Kanny spoke. They're probably father's friends, otherwise the servants wouldn't have let them in. Tsukiyama Shu said with an indifferent tone. He looked a bit listless, as if he found everything boring. Right now, Tsukiyama Shu and Kanny were in a pavilion within the Tsukiyama estate, leisurely having their afternoon tea. Of course, this afternoon tea was actually made from human blood. But it wasn't obtained through hunting humans by the Tsukiyama family. Rather, it was acquired through special channels, such as a blood bank. Given the influence of the Tsukiyama family, obtaining some blood packs wasn't exactly difficult. After a while, Byakuya, Ito, and all the others also arrived at the pavilion. Tsukiyama Shu's keen sense of smell immediately picked up a very peculiar aroma. No, more than one. From a young age, he had possessed an abnormal obsession with gourmet delicacies. Having eaten too much human flesh and drunk too much human blood, he had grown sick of it. He sought a greater sense of stimulation. This was also why, in the original story, Tsukiyama Shu's eating habits were completely different from those of normal ghouls. One could even call them perverted, such as the classic eyeball sashimi. And at this moment, the strange, enticing aroma he smelled naturally came from Uchiha Byakuya and Yoshimura Ito. They were both hybrids carrying the bloodlines of both humans and ghouls. Their scent was certainly different from that of ordinary humans or ordinary ghouls. But once Tsukiyama Shu saw Uchiha Byakuya and Yoshimura Ito, he immediately understood a great deal. So that's who it is. Ah, what a shame. Tsukiyama Shu shook his head slightly, with a tone of deep regret. These two were celebrities in Tokyo, so of course he would recognize them. And it was precisely because it was them that they had such an extraordinary aroma. One a half human, the other a half ghoul. This also made Tsukiyama Shu realize that the scent of human-ghoul hybrids was so distinct, that it was such an exquisite delicacy he had never tasted before. And the most unfortunate thing was, he didn't dare harbor any ideas about the two of them. Otherwise, he would undoubtedly be dooming the entire Tsukiyama family. Capítulo 201, Wedding Shopping. A few hours later, all the members of the Ghoul Research Society Club had finally left the Tsukiyama estate. They had gained quite a bit from the trip, learning about the daily lives of upper-class ghouls. It's really all thanks to Uchiha-san that we even had the chance to visit a place like the Tsukiyama household. Ghouls in high society look even less different from humans now. They've already blended perfectly into human society. On the way back to Kamui University, several of the members were talking to each other in awe. 20th Ward, Anteku Cafe. The day that Byakuya and Ito had set for their wedding was now fast approaching. Ito-san, look at this wedding dress. I feel like this one really suits you. At this moment, Irimi Kaya held up a picture on her phone and showed it to Ito. The picture on the phone was, of course, of the wedding dress that Irimi Kaya thought would suit Ito the most. I think this one's better, this one's worth a look too. Kirishima Hikari, also came over to chime in. At the moment, Irumi, Kaya, and Hikari were helping the soon-to-be-married couple, Byakuya and Ito, pick out their wedding dress and suit. But since Irumi, Kaya, and Hikari had completely different tastes and preferences, they were already arguing over the wedding dress options. They're all nice, but we'll only know which one works best after we try them on at the bridal shop, Byakuya said with a smile. Then you should all go, I'll stay behind to mind the shop, Yoshimura Kyuzan said. The shop suddenly went silent for a moment, and everyone's gaze instinctively turned toward Yoshimura Kyuzan. That's backwards, we should be the ones staying. The manager should go with Byakuya-kun and Ito-chan. Hikari spoke up first. Yes, no matter how you look at it, manager, you have far more reason to go than any of us, Kirishima Arata added. Just remember to take a picture in the wedding dress and show us later, Irumi Kaya said. I can already picture how dashing I'd look in a groom's suit. With Byakuya-san's looks, he'll be even more handsome than me, Kamiya Enji said somewhat narcissistically. Give me a break, with how plain you are, it wouldn't matter what you wore. Irumi Kaya shot him a dead fish-eyed look. I actually want to see how Yomo-san looks in formal wear. I bet he'd look pretty dashing. Enji Koma brushed off Irumi Kaya's jab completely, steering the topic toward Yomo Renji instead. I'll pass. Renji immediately distanced himself from the suggestion. I agree, the manager should be the one going with them. At that moment, Hoito Roma also chimed in. She was currently cleaning up shards of a broken cup on the floor. Even though her true identity had long been exposed, she still enthusiastically played the role she had back at Anteku, maybe a clumsy, ordinary waitress. So every now and then, she'd just break a plate or cup, and her acting was so convincing that it was hard to tell whether she was genuinely that careless or simply pretending to be. There you go again. When are you ever going to be more careful? Renji immediately began lecturing Roma. Sorry, I'll be more careful next time. Roma merely smiled and scratched her head. She had already said that line countless times. In fact, the reason Roma still played the role of a clumsy waitress was because she found it fun to mess with Renji alongside Yuta. Yuta himself would also sneak attack Renji from time to time. To be precise, several members of the clowns actually liked to tease Renji. In the end, under the strong urging of the staff, Yoshimura Kyuzan had no choice but to finally accept their request. Joining them were also Yuruka Minami and Arima Kishu. Mainly because Minami had actually wanted to try on a wedding dress herself, though she didn't really have the nerve to say it out loud at the time. In addition, the kids like Mayu, Suzuya Juzu, Yasuhisa Kurona, and Yasuhisa Nashiro also wanted to come along. As for Kenki Ken, Kirishima Tauka, and Kirishima Yato, they had already gone out to play. But just as Byakuya and the others were about to leave, the shop door opened. A tall, well-built middle-aged man in a suit walked in. He wore a pair of small, refined glasses and had the air of a gentleman. This man was Tsukiyama Marumo, president of the Tsukiyama Group and head of the Tsukiyama family. It's a pity I wasn't able to receive you both last time. I've heard about your upcoming wedding, and I'd like to offer the best wedding attire and venue I can provide. Tsukiyama directly Marumo stated his purpose the moment he entered. The Tsukiyama Group owned quite a few businesses, be it hotels, bridal shops, all of the like were certainly among them, so Tsukiyama Marumo had the confidence to make such an offer. Then thank you very much, President Tsukiyama. Naturally, Byakuya had no actual doubts about Tsukiyama Marumo. Come to think of it, in the original story, the wedding venue for Kenki Ken and Kirishima Tauka was also provided by the Tsukiyama family. With Tsukiyama Marumo's help, they arrived at a very luxurious bridal shop. The so-called luxury was, of course, reflected in the sheer size and lavish decor of it. Tsukiyama Marumo had come along in person, and the shop manager and staff were so intimidated that they didn't dare slack off for even a second. Let's start with the wedding dresses. At that moment, Byakuya spoke. There wasn't much to say about wedding dresses, as they were purely a matter of personal taste. The one Ito chose was a satin gown. The overall design was simple, but that simplicity only highlighted its unique elegance. It gave off an air of sophistication. The fabric was exceptionally smooth, with barely a wrinkle in sight. Right now, Ito had already tried on the gown. Though still petite, her figure looked beautifully curved in it. Her slender waistline was graceful, making her appear like a refined princess. "Beautiful," Byakuya immediately commented. "I think so too, let's go with this one," Ito said gladly, smiling at the slightly captivated Byakuya. Tsukiyama Marumo gently adjusted his glasses and said calmly, "Understood. I'll have a custom version expedited immediately." Next, it was Byakuya's turn. His fitting process was even more complicated than Ito's. It was, obviously, because Ito insisted on personally helping him pick everything with the utmost care. Capítulo 202, Down to Business. In the end, Uchiha Byakuya chose a black suit that was both the most comfortable and also best fitting. Black just so happened to be Byakuya's favorite color or shade as well. At that moment, Byakuya and Yoshimura Ito stood side by side, looking like a prince and princess straight out of a fairy tale, radiantly dazzling. And luckily, the shop staff captured this deeply meaningful moment for them. Yoshimura Kyuzen simply watched from the side the entire time, barely saying a word. But for him, just being able to personally witness this scene was already something that brought him a great sense of comfort and joy. "Dad, come take a picture with us too." At that moment, Ito suddenly pulled Yoshimura Kyuzen over. The latter looked momentarily surprised, then a more gentle and kindly smile appeared on his face. Yoshimura Kyuzen always wore suits anyway, so standing next to Byakuya and Ito for a photo didn't feel out of place at all. Click. The shop staff took many photos for them in rapid succession. Meanwhile, on the other side, Mayu, Suzuya Juzu, Yasuhisa Kirona, and Yasuhisa Nashiro were all having the time of their lives. The shop staff didn't dare stop them and simply let them do whatever they pleased. At this point, Mayu had already put on a child-sized wedding dress. She had always truly loved beautiful things, especially anything that made her look prettier, so she adored wedding dresses. "Juzu, why are you just standing there? Hurry and put on a wedding dress. Oh wait, I mean a tuxedo." Seeing Juzu still standing around dazed, Mayu immediately reminded him. Kirona and Nashiro had already tried on their favorite wedding dresses, and the two of them even asked the shop staff to take some photos for them together. Yes, just the two girls. After all, the bond between this pair of twin sisters had always taken priority to any other sort of affection. So pretty, they both look so beautiful in wedding dresses. At that moment, Yuruka Minami looked at Kirona and Nashiro and sighed in admiration. Aramakishu was silent for a moment, then said, "Aren't you going to try one on? I feel like you'd really enjoy it." Hearing that, Minami suddenly looked flustered. I feel like." But she quickly composed herself and nodded firmly. At this point, what was there to be shy about? Minami had already chosen the wedding dress she liked. Without saying another word, she went ahead and selected that one. Then, standing in front of the mirror, Minami suddenly felt a strange sense of wonder. Before this, she had never even dared to imagine herself, a ghoul girl, wearing such a beautiful wedding dress like a human girl would. Arima himself had also changed into a sharp black suit. With the help of the shop staff, they took many photos together. Once the wedding attire was chosen, it was time to select the wedding venue. But really, there was no need to pick, as Tsukiyama Marumo had already arranged everything. The largest hotel under the Tsukiyama Group's name, which also happened to be the most luxurious hotel in all of Tokyo, was chosen. When the time came, the entire building would be reserved solely for their wedding. Of course, there would be a lot of people attending. Besides everyone from the Anteku Group, there would also be some familiar faces from the TSC, such as Akihiro Kanu, Marud Itsuki, and the Mato family, Mato Kasuka, Mato Kurio, and their daughter Mato Akira. And of course, there were also people like Washu Nomura, Kamishiro Rise, and Washu Yashitoki, among others. Byakuya and Ito refused all gifts. They didn't want any superficial formalities, and just for everyone to come and enjoy themselves to the fullest. On the day of the wedding, Kirishima Hikari helped Ito apply a light layer of makeup. All done, Ito-san, right now you're the most beautiful bride in the whole world. Hikari admired her own work as she smiled and praised. Thank you, Kirishima-san. Looking at herself in the mirror, a smile appeared on Ito's face. Clearly, she was more than satisfied with how she looked right now. On Byakuya's side, someone had also helped tidy him up carefully. There weren't many complicated steps involved with him, and soon, Byakuya and Ito walked into the banquet hall together. Every table was piled with all kinds of food and wine. Some certain people were already drunk as well. Yuta, you're partying with me till dawn tonight. At this moment, Yomo Renji snatched Yuta's wine glass from the latter's hand and downed it in one gulp. His tolerance was obviously pretty poor. After just a few glasses, he was already this drunk. This was Yuta's first time seeing Yomo Renji drunk, and his expression looked like he'd just made a shocking discovery. Off to the side, Koma Enji and Irimikaya were having a drinking contest. Didn't you brag about your drinking skills? Today I'll see who goes down first. As she spoke, Irimikaya poured a glass down her throat. Who's afraid of who? There's no way I'm losing to you. Koma Enji replied with full confidence. As longtime rivals, the two of them were especially competitive about things like this. And both of them were already tipsy, making them even easier to provoke than usual. Basically, it turned into one glass after another being poured into their stomachs. Would you like something to drink, wine or coffee? At that moment, Arima asked Minami. I think I'll stick with coffee. I'm not very good at drinking. Minami replied. All right. Arima poured a cup of coffee for Minami, then poured one for himself as well. Looking at the coffee in front of her, then glancing at the alcohol on the side, Minami suddenly became curious as to what Kishu would be like if he got drunk. Normally, Kishu was extremely serious. He hardly ever showed any emotional fluctuations. So she was curious whether a drunk Kishu would be a completely different person. Like, say, Yomo-san. Kishu, can you drink alcohol? Minami couldn't help but ask. No, drinking makes my mind unclear, so I tend to avoid don't drink. Arima calmly explained. Oh, okay. Minami sounded slightly disappointed. But she had picked up on something important. Based on what Kishu just said, he probably had a very low tolerance and would end up like Yomo Renji once he was drunk, showing a totally different side. That only made her more curious. If the opportunity came up later, she'd definitely try it out. Of course, today's main characters were Byakuya and Ito. But right now, they were just naturally sitting with everyone, enjoying good food and wine together. There were none of those long-winded and obnoxious procedures. Just having fun was all that mattered today. As the night grew late, many people at the venue had drunk themselves into unconsciousness, collapsing on the spot. Those who hadn't drunk or hadn't gotten drunk carried them back. Byakuya and Ito had also returned to their own home. Ito had already changed out of her wedding dress. Holding a towel, she was just about to enter the bathroom. Just then, however, she turned back toward Byakuya with a subtly meaningful smile, the corners of her lips slightly lifted. Time to get down to the real business, Tilda. Capitulo 203, Wedding Night. Yeah. Uchiha Byakuya responded. At a time like this, he didn't actually feel nervous at all. After all, they weren't some inexperienced young couple that were just starting to date, and Yoshimura Ito wasn't showing the slightest sign of shyness either, so naturally she wouldn't influence him that way. However, after a while, Ito was still standing at the bathroom door, as if waiting for something. What are you standing there spacing out for? Come in, will you? At that moment, Ito spoke softly. Only then did Byakuya understand what she meant. He also loosened his clothes and belt and entered the bathroom along with Ito. They really were just bathing together, nothing else happened. Newlyweds helping each other wash their backs, what's wrong with that? Once they were washed clean, they felt completely refreshed, and the lingering smell of alcohol and all kinds of food brought back from the hotel was also gone by now. Even though neither Byakuya nor Ito had drunk any alcohol, just being in that environment for a while naturally caused a bit of the scent to stick to them. Afterwards, the two returned to the bedroom, still wearing their bathrobes. Should we turn off the lights, or leave them on? At that moment, Ito was sitting on the edge of the bed, her little feet swaying, and suddenly asked, "That, I'm not really sure, but I think it might better to leave them on." Byakuya replied with slight embarrassment. Because what was about to happen next would be a first for both him and also Ito, neither of them had any experience, and they hadn't exactly done much research either. So both Byakuya and Ito were in a pretty clueless state right now. "Then let's leave them on." After speaking, Ito patted the bedding beside her, seemingly signaling Uchiha Byakuya to sit next to her. "Now it's time for something very important." Ito Yashimura lifted a small part of her sleepwear, placing one hand on her shoulder. "If I remember right, you should know that, for us ghouls, this is our wedding ritual." Ito glanced up at Byakuya. "Of course, if you're unwilling, just pretend I didn't say anything." After all, she knew Byakuya was a half-human, and although he had ghoul blood, he barely had any actual ghoul traits. Compared to a proper half-ghoul, he leaned even closer to a human. And given Byakuya's life thus far, it seemed to her that he was even less likely to want to follow the typical ghoul wedding rituals. "I'm not unwilling at all." Byakuya sat down face to face in front of Ito, without even the slightest hint of hesitation. "Then let's begin." Ito immediately hugged Byakuya. Then both Byakuya and Ito bit into each other's right shoulder with their teeth, more specifically, the trapezius area. They both bit down hard, because this ritual required leaving a bite mark on each other's shoulder, one that would never fade, symbolizing that their love would never be erased. Drawing blood was the bare minimum. Even though Ito, as a half-ghoul, had extremely strong regenerative abilities, she could control that ability to simply not let the bite mark heal completely. Byakuya had to be careful about the same thing, as his high physical attributes gave him automatic healing, so he needed to consciously suppress it as well. "That should be good enough. It didn't hurt too much, did it?" Ito asked with concern in her tone. She had been bitten by Byakuya as well, but her pain tolerance was top-tier thanks to all the harsh experiences of growing up in the 24th Ward. "It didn't." Byakuya actually wanted to ask whether it hurt for Ito, but after thinking about it, he figured that such a question was completely unnecessary for her. At that moment, Ito even licked the wound on Byakuya's shoulder, cleaning off the blood on top, as if that could somehow ease any pain. "This bite mark has to stay forever. Only then does it prove that we'll always remember each other. If one day this mark disappears, that means you no longer care about me." Ito was still closely hugging Byakuya and whispered in his ear. "That will never happen." Byakuya responded earnestly with a calm voice. "I love you." At that moment, Ito Yashimura pulled away from Byakuya's ear, but still didn't loosen her embrace. Instead, she looked directly into his eyes from close-up. Byakuya responded immediately, "I love you too." Even though they had long understood each other's feelings, saying it face to face like this still felt completely different. Both of their heartbeats quickened just a little in that moment. At that point, Ito's right eye suddenly turned into a dark, crimson Kakugan. Ito looked at him. "Does this look ugly? Should I turn it back into a normal eye?" "It's not ugly at all. On the contrary, I think it's beautiful." Byakuya answered frankly. In the eyes of most humans, Kakugan like this were horrifying and frightening. The fundamental reason for it was, of course, that they feared ghouls. But this was Ito, Byakuya's beloved. Besides, he never thought a Kakugan looked ugly in the first place. Ito immediately gave a soft smile. A rare, sweet, and pure smile appeared on her face. The next moment, Byakuya quietly pulled her into a tighter embrace. And as if they were connected in spirit, at that exact moment, Ito leaned even closer and kissed him. After a long while, their warm lips finally parted. "So, about what comes next, do we just get right to it?" Ito said it quite directly. "Honestly, I'm really curious. What kind of fruit would come from the union of a half-human and a half-ghoul? I guess it depends on luck. But no matter whether our future baby turns out to be half-human or half-ghoul, being able to enjoy the food we cook with our own hands will be enough." After that, the two of them began to slowly undress each other. Ito's exquisite, adorable face finally revealed a rare trace of a genuine, faint blush. Coupled with her single kakugan, it made her even more breathtakingly beautiful. Seeing that sight, Byakuya couldn't help but feel a little embarrassed himself. The night passed. Capítulo 204, Eternal Love Uchiha Eiko. Due to a one-shot bulls, Uchiha Ito very soon discovered that she was already pregnant. However, she didn't tell Uchiha Byakuya right away. Did something good happen? You seem pretty happy. Byakuya naturally noticed that Ito was in high spirits and felt curious about what had happened. Do you want to take a guess? Ito instantly teased him. How would I guess that? At least give me a hint. Byakuya replied with a slightly awkward tone. Then I'll give you a hint, put simply, it's something good and also it's completely your fault. Ito said in a playful tone. Something good, and it's my fault. Byakuya immediately fell into thought. He still couldn't figure out what good thing he might have done. Seeing that Byakuya was still deep in thought after a long while, Ito Yashimura decided not to mess with him any further. You idiot, fine, I'll give you a more specific hint. As she spoke, Ito placed her hand gently on her lower abdomen. Upon seeing this, Byakuya finally had a sudden moment of realization. His eyes widened slightly, clearly showing his disbelief. That fast? Byakuya exclaimed in surprise. It had only been about 10 days, right? So that means he really did get it in one shot. After all, he hadn't done it either before or after that time. To be honest, I was surprised too, and happy, but I'm also kind of at a loss. I'm suddenly going to be a mom. Ito lowered her head slightly, as if trying to sense the little life within her. Byakuya also felt a complicated, indescribable emotion rise up within, but without question, happiness made up most of it. Several months passed since then, nearly a year had gone by. Byakuya had been taking care of Ito for almost every single day, especially during the later stages. He also, of course, tried his best to prepare all kinds of nutritious dishes and soups to supplement her diet. Now, inside the cafe, Anteku in the 20th ward, Ito was already sporting a pronounced baby bump. Our daughter, have you thought of a name for her yet? Ito asked Byakuya. They had already gone to the hospital for a checkup and confirmed that the baby was indeed a girl. Nowadays, with the growing momentum of peaceful coexistence between humans and ghouls, a lot of major hospitals in the Tokyo region were also open to receiving ghouls. Not to mention special individuals such as Byakuya and Ito. Byakuya gave an awkward laugh. Because he was the classic type of guy who was bad at naming things, he had spent several days thinking before finally coming up with a name he thought was decent. He just didn't know whether Ito would actually like it. The name I came up with is Uchiha Eiko. What do you think? Byakuya asked. Not bad, it actually sounds pretty nice. Ito nodded slightly. Although Kirishima-Nissen and Irami-Nissen had also given them a few suggestions before, in the end, the name they themselves came up with still felt the best. Eiko-chan, did you hear that? This name was picked by your daddy. At that moment, Ito gently stroked the child inside her belly, speaking in a soft and gentle tone. Thanks to her special body as a half-ghoul, Eiko-chan wouldn't be as prone to ending up a miscarriage as other hybrid babies. At the hospital, the natural delivery went very smoothly. Little Eiko came into the world. Ito's body was almost completely fine as well. After all, she had an extremely exaggerated regenerative ability. Her body recovered immediately, showing no signs of just having given birth. At that moment, Byakuya was sitting at the bedside, holding the newborn Eiko in his arms, while Ito sat closely beside him, watching the newly born baby. What a cute little one, and she really does look a lot like us. Ito had a look of doting affection on her face. Now she could more deeply understand the feeling her own mother must have had when giving birth to her. That kind of feeling, only when you experience it yourself can you truly comprehend its nature. Yeah, even her hair color is perfectly inherited. Byakuya sighed with emotion. Influenced by the parents' traits, Eiko Uchiha's hair was a mix of white and green, but it didn't look weird at all. Instead, the combination of both white and green was quite harmonious, so it looked rather beautiful. And although her facial features weren't yet fully developed since she had just been born, The resemblance was already visible. Byakuya and Ito were both very attractive, so with features inherited from the both of them, Eiko was guaranteed not to be anything less than beautiful. Eiko barely cried at all. She was quietly watching her parents while sucking on her little thumb while wearing a cute smile on her face. By the way, is Eiko-chan a half-human or a half-ghoul? At this moment, Ito asked curiously. Let me see. Byakuya was curious as well. He gently turned little Eiko over, and with his Manjikayo Sharingan, he could easily tell whether or not she had a kakyuhu. After a careful observation, he discovered that it wasn't just a question of whether she had a kakyuhu, rather, it was that she simultaneously possessed all 4 types of kagyun. Rinkaku, Kukaku, Baikaku, and Yukaku, these were the 4 kagyun types. The vast majority of ghouls, however, were born with only 1 type of kagyun. Very few ghouls were born with 2 kagyun. The only known cases so far were Hinami Fuguchi and Mayu. Both had inherited 2 types of kagyun from their parents. And the only one who possessed all 4 types was Shikori Ryo in the original story, a genius among geniuses, who due to successive tragic events ultimately became mad, broken, and twisted. But now, a second individual to possess all 4 types of kagyun had appeared, more precisely, a half-ghoul, Uchiha Eiko. Although Byakuya wasn't entirely clear on the genetic mechanism behind possessing all 4 kagyun, he figured it was most likely inherited from Ito. Through cannibalism, Ito had absorbed many kakyuhu and long since acquired all 4 kagyun types. Of course, originally Ito only had 1 kagyun, and Yukaku and the others were all obtained later through cannibalism. To be born with 4 kagyun types, Eiko and Shikori were basically the only 2 peerless prodigies in existence. And being a naturally born half-ghoul as well, that made 2 in total, only Eiko and her mother Ito. If nothing unexpected happened, Eiko would also inherit Byakuya's Sharingan. As for when her eyes would actually awaken, that was anyone's guess. Capitulo 205, These Days, the End. In theory, Uchiha Byakuya possessed both the Uchiha bloodline and the Washu bloodline in his body. You could say it was thanks to the system when he first transmigrated. The Uchiha bloodline went without saying, and the Washu bloodline definitely wasn't weak either. A bloodline that capable of dragonification was, at least in the world of Tokyo Ghoul, among the most top tier. After all, think about it. The dragon orphans born from the dragon were very likely the true origin of ghouls. A bloodline that served as the origin of ghouls, what more needed to be said? Moreover, ghouls with the Washu bloodline were born Kakuja. It was important to note, Kakuja, not half Kakuja. That alone was enough to reflect how powerful this bloodline was. Innate possession of 4 kagyun types plus natural-born half-ghoul plus Uchiha bloodline and the Washu bloodline. Half inherited from Yoshimura Ito and half inherited from Uchiha Byakuya. One could say that Eiko's talent was maxed out from the start, the very definition of extraordinarily gifted. She has a kakyuhu, so she should be a half-ghoul. And it's not just 1 kagyun, Eiko-chan has all 4 types. At this moment, Byakuya spoke. And right then, Yoshimura Kyuzan and everyone from Anteku came in as well. We happened to overhear what you were saying, we hope that's okay. Kirishima Arata said immediately. It's fine, it's not some kind of unspeakable secret. Byakuya replied. She's a half-ghoul like Ito-san, and she has 4 kagyun. That's unheard of. Kirishima Hikari exclaimed in amazement. Actually, they weren't entirely sure what it meant to have 4 kagyun, just that it was probably really powerful. I heard that ghouls born with 2 kagyun are already considered geniuses, far stronger than those with only 1 kagyun. Especially when at the same level, they're basically unmatched. Koma Enji said. Irami Kaya then added. But the truth is, until now we've only seen Mayu as someone born with 2 kagyun. And since she hasn't shown her power, it's hard to imagine how terrifying Eiko-chan's growth potential will be, being born with 4 kagyun. Hoito Roma naturally had a broader knowledge and deeper understanding about the conditions of ghouls born with multiple kagyun. She spoke, ghouls born with 2 kagyun usually have some kind of special ability, for example, extremely sharp perception, or being extraordinarily gifted in some physical trait. Eiko-chan, born with 4 kagyun, will definitely be even more incredible on top of that. Regardless of all of that, she's a very adorable child. Yashimura Kyuzen said with a warm smile. He didn't care whether she had 1 kagyun or many. He only hoped that the little Eiko could stay far away from any killing and live a happy and stable life. So this is Eiko-chan. At this moment, Mayu peeked out from behind Yashimura Kyuzen. She had of course come along as well. She really wanted to meet her little sister. Can I call her Eiko-chan? Mayu walked up and asked Byakuya and Ito. After all, she wasn't truly the daughter of Byakuya and Ito, and therefore not really Eiko's older sister. So she wanted to ask first. Of course you can. Byakuya nodded as he ruffled her hair. Mayu happily nodded and immediately spoke to the little Eiko. Hello, Eiko-chan. Though Eiko herself couldn't speak yet and couldn't understand what Mayu was even saying, it seemed she could sense that the girl in front of her was being very friendly, so she also showed a smile. Eiko-chan is so well-behaved and smart. Seeing this, Hikari couldn't help but exclaim in admiration. Thinking back to when Tauka and Ayato were just born, they had cried and fussed all the time. Every day they had to worry about how to calm them down. Well, her parents are Byakuya-san and Ito-san. Their bloodlines are already top tier. Irami Kaya remarked. In her opinion, one was the strongest half-human, and the other was the strongest half-ghoul. How could the combination of those bloodlines not be outstanding? As time eventually passed, and the years flew by, Uchiha Eiko gradually began to show her exceptional talents, such as an extraordinary ability to learn. Whether it was learning to walk or talk, she was far faster than any ordinary toddlers would be. And then there was her perception. She could sense Byakuya and Ito from across a door or even a street, and would immediately call out, Papa, Mama. Her physical strength was naturally also beyond the norm. Eiko-chan was only 5 years old now, but if rated using the traditional system, she had already reached at least SSS level. Because, with her inherited Washu bloodline, Eiko-chan was a natural-born Kakuja. Just being a natural Kakuja alone was already enough to push her rating past SS level, and her physical capabilities, of course, far exceeded those of normal ghouls as well. Add in the fact that she had 4 kagyun. Byakuya even regularly fed her RC concentrate like it was tea. For natural-born half-ghouls, the stuff had no side effects at all. It was only dangerous for humans and half-humans other than him. You could say that Uchiha Eiko, in her current overpowered state, already had a Kakuja form on par with Yashimura Kyuzen, even without ever engaging in cannibalism. Being born with 4 kagyun, she didn't even need to bother with cannibalism. She could just keep growing stronger simply by raising her internal RC cell count. Her Kakuja form naturally resembled that of Ito and Yashimura Kyuzen. After all, Ito inherited hers from her father, and Eiko-chan in turn inherited hers from Ito. Given how absurdly strong she was now, even calling her SSS level felt like an understatement. Most of the time, Eiko-chan played over at Anteku, and Byakuya and Ito would come back to spend time with her whenever they were free. These days, they had plenty of time. Eiko-chan, have you been a good girl and listened to Grandpa at the cafe? Ito gently rubbed Eiko-chan's chubby cheeks the moment she got home. Even at just 5 years old, Eiko-chan's features increasingly resembled those of Byakuya and Ito. Her face was naturally adorable, with a soft, rosy glow to her cheeks. And under the careful grooming of Hikari, Irami Kaya, and the others, she looked just like a little princess. Yes, I've been very obedient. Eiko nodded happily. Papa. At that moment, Eiko-chan ran toward Byakuya behind Ito, opening her arms as if she wanted to be picked up. Naturally, Byakuya immediately lifted her by the armpits and held her up high. Eiko-chan loved this lift-up-high feeling. With bursts of giggles, she was lifted up again and again by her father as she smiled. Capitulo 206, Aramamika Extra. Eiko. At that moment, little Mayu came back as well. Though perhaps little Mayu was no longer an appropriate name. Now that Mayu was already 18, she had fully grown into a graceful and mature young lady. She had grown to about 165 centimeters in height, roughly the same as the current Suzuya Juzu. Her figure was also quite impressive, and Mayu, who loved beauty, had developed her own distinct sense of fashion and style. Mayone. Little Eiko beamed with a joyful smile. Usually, the ones who played with her most often were Mayu, Kirishima Tauka, Juzu, Kurona, and Nashiro, as well as the other big brothers and sisters. So sweet, Tilda. Mayu gently patted little Eiko on the head. Mayu, how have your and Juzu's grades been lately? At this moment, Uchiha Byakuya asked Mayu. Juzu's grades have always been pretty good. Mine are a little. Mayu gave a slightly embarrassed smile. Try your best anyway. You and Juzu are about to take the uni entrance exams. Even if you don't get into some prestigious university, at least give it a solid effort. Byakuya's tone held no criticism, rather, he spoke calmly and gently. It was thanks to his encouragement that Mayu and Juzu had even started attending school like ordinary children. Now both of them were already in their final year of high school, just a few months away from taking the university entrance exams. However, Mayu usually spent more time and energy on her appearance and studying fashion magazines, learning how to style herself, and so on, so her academic performance wasn't exactly stellar. Of course, academics weren't the only path in life. With Mayu's natural gift of dual kagyun, she could shine brilliantly in the TSC without much effort. But Byakuya still believed that Mayu and Juzu, at such a youthful age, should be enjoying their youth to the fullest. And since Mayu herself wasn't particularly interested in fighting and killing, perhaps the TSC wasn't a good path for her after all. I'll do my best. I'll have Juzu tutor me. Mayu nodded with determination. Papa, where are Uncle Arima and Auntie Minami? At that moment, Uchiha Eiko suddenly asked. Byakuya glanced at the time and said, they should be back soon. Arima Kishu and Minami had, of course, long since gotten married, and even had a daughter who was only a year younger than Eiko. Her name was Arima Mika. Although she wasn't a natural-born half-ghoul, but rather a half-human, she had still inherited the best traits of both Arima Kishu and Minami, namely an exceptional intellect and outstanding physical abilities. And since the dragon's toxin had resolved the lifespan issue for half-humans, being one didn't have many drawbacks anymore. After all, wasn't Arima himself a half-human, yet his strength needed no further explanation. And Mika's potential for growth could almost rival that of her father, Arima. You really like Mika-chan, huh? Ito Yashimura said with a smile. Yeah. Eiko nodded seriously. The reason she had just asked when Uncle Arima and Auntie Minami would be back was because she and Arima Mika were best friends. She was waiting eagerly for Mika to come play with her. Eiko is just too adorable. She suddenly reminds me of when Tauka-chan was just a tiny kid, how cute she was back then. Let me know when you're ready for the second half or need any revisions. At that moment, Kirishima Hikari was sitting at the counter, resting his chin on one hand, and couldn't help but sigh. Tauka is still really cute now, Kirishima Arata said. Next to Hikari, Kirishima Tauka was wiping glasses. She had already grown into a graceful and beautiful young girl. Right now, she was attending Saize High School. On school days, she went to class as usual, and after school, she came to the coffee shop. Well, I can't possibly stay a little kid forever, can I? Tauka said with slight exasperation. Ha, I was just joking. Hikari chuckled lightly. Speaking of which, Kenki-kun has already gotten into Kamui University. You've got to work hard too, Tauka, or else if Kenki-kun meets a really amazing girl at school, he might get snatched away by someone else. At that moment, Hikari teased her. The Kenki-kun she mentioned, of course, was Kenki-ken. I know. Tauka responded, feeling a little down. Because, just like Mayu, her academic performance was also rather average. Getting into the same Kamui University as Kenki-ken wasn't going to be easy. Come to think of it, she hadn't really noticed before, but Kenki's grades were actually that good. Not long after, Arima and Minami also returned. They were holding Mika's hand, bringing the little Mika along with them. Mika's facial features resembled Minami more, though she also had traces of arima in her face. Wearing braided pigtails, she was a very pretty and adorable girl. Her personality was quite similar to arima. Maybe it was genetic, maybe she was imitating her father, or perhaps it was a bit of both. She almost never showed expression on her face, except when she was with her mom and dad or playing with Eiko. Then she would occasionally reveal a happy smile. Soon after, Eiko and Mika held hands and went off to play on their own. Capítulo 207. Eiko wants to awaken her eyes extra. Papa, can I look at your eyes again? Uchiha Eiko was originally sitting on the sofa reading a cartoon manga, and at that moment, she suddenly asked Uchiha Byakuya. My eyes, you mean the Sharingan? Byakuya asked back. He no longer hid the term Sharingan from Ito and Eiko. Since they were his most trusted lover and daughter, of course, some things were still omitted. However, it was inevitable that Eiko would awaken her eyes someday. For the Uchiha clan, awakening the eyes didn't necessarily require going through extreme grief. Just like Sarada, emotional agitation also seemed to be a possible trigger. Byakuya felt that Eiko just needed an opportunity. Maybe one day, she'd suddenly awaken them. Of course, awakening the first Tamo was relatively easy, but evolving into the Mangekyo Sharingan was far harder. It wasn't something that could be achieved just through emotional excitement. Memo. Eiko nodded eagerly with anticipation in her eyes. Byakuya then revealed his Mangekyo Sharingan. His black pupils turned crimson, and the unique pattern of dual Kamui appeared. So cool, how did Papa's eyes turn like that? Eiko couldn't help but ask. She only knew that she had a single Kakugan like Mama, and didn't realize she could also have the Sharingan. It was just that she hadn't awakened it yet. Actually, Eiko, you have it too, you just haven't awakened it yet. Byakuya said. I have it too, but why can't I make it appear? Eiko immediately tried it out, and as a result, only her right eye turned into a Kakugan. There was no sign of the Sharingan like her papa's. That's why I said you haven't awakened it yet. You need a trigger, though it's hard to say when that'll happen. Byakuya explained. And your Sharingan won't be exactly the same as mine. Every pair of Sharingan, once developed to a certain level, has its own unique ability. But since you're my daughter, there's a chance you might inherit one of mine. Just like how both Sasuke and Itachi's Mangekyo Sharingan possess the Amaterasu ability. That was probably because they were blood brothers. If Eiko could inherit one of his dual Kamui abilities, that would be really great. But growing to the point of Mangekyo Sharingan, that was going to be very difficult for Eiko. Moreover, Byakuya didn't tell Eiko the exact method of awakening the Sharingan, because such a thing couldn't be forced. The more Eiko deliberately thought about awakening it, the harder it might be to achieve. Okay, Tilda. Eiko nodded obediently, left only to quietly look forward to that day's arrival. At the end,